So can everyone see the presentation now? Are we good on that front?
Yes.
Cool. All right. So thanks again for being here. The presentation today is called Highway 61 Revisited. It is about connecting downtown Duluth to the waterfront. My name is Jordan Vanderhagen. I originally did my thesis in school on trying to find a better way to connect, basically connect downtown to Canal Park and the waterfront. And it was basically kind of realized that I-35 serves as the main barrier to making that happen. And so what I did in my thesis was kind of rehabbing the Lake Avenue overpass as the most important spot to make things happen. But since moving to Duluth and forming a group, which we kind of call ourselves the Duluth Waterfront Collective, we've basically expanded that concept to include a 1-mile stretch in downtown from Mesaba Avenue to the first tunnel on the interstate. And so this is kind of a presentation overviewing that concept and the history of the area. So first thing we want to talk about today is water. And so we have here a slide. It says water. People love this stuff, which is true. And a lot of people, really focus on water being important from a physical sense. But it really has a lot of effects on people in psychological ways as well. And so, calm water is something that people are into, but it's not actually the most exciting form of water that people enjoy being around. There was a study done on different types of water and the effect that it has on human psychology and what people have a preference for. And so calm water ranked kind of right in the middle. What people really don't like a lot is like swampy water, which is kind of understandable. It's muddy and gross, and it's actually really interesting from an ecological perspective, but apparently, people generally tend to prefer other bodies of water. What people really enjoy is rushing water, and the reasoning for that is that it has a sound component built into it. And so this allows people to basically, it creates a white noise that actually has an intense psychological effect on people. And it's capable of moving people into a state that's almost similar to like when you're a child and you're super creative, or when you're in a deep meditation. And it can cause people to heal themselves and create exciting new thoughts that they wouldn't normally have. And it can break people out of kind of thought patterns that can be damaging. So water is really important to humans, for a number of reasons, physical, psychological, and more. And so one thing about our waterfront is that it kind of alternates between this sort of calm body of water and a very interesting sort of loud, oftentimes, waterfront, as many people working on the Lake Walk project right now know well. So the impacts of connecting cities to water cannot be understated. There have been a lot of projects in recent decades that have focused on how we can connect to various water bodies in our cities. One that I looked at was the Chattanooga waterfront in Tennessee. And Chattanooga was a city very similar to Duluth. It was a coal mining town instead of dealing with iron ore and stuff like that. But what they did in their city is they created this very elaborate engagement process in which they worked with their communities to figure out, what do we want to do in this city? What kind of things can we bring to town that will make it more exciting and make it a more livable place for communities? And what they did to accomplish that was to remove a large arterial highway that was running along their waterfront. And so since they've done that, the space that was opened up has led to $400 million in new construction. It's overall has led to $1.2 billion in building projects. So that includes not only the buildings that were built in the space they opened up, but also buildings in the surrounding areas that have been rehabbed and renovated since this area became more desirable. It created 300 new housing units for the city. And it's brought up tourism by 75% and tourism spending by 50%, and led to the creation of nearly 100 new businesses, while also increasing property tax revenues by 99%. Another city I looked at was Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And so they too, spent a lot of time kind of reimagining what their waterfront could look like. And so that led to 130 million investment in their riverfront areas, which led to a $4.1 billion return on investment. And then it also led to a number of new high quality parks, which actually led to 17.1 million in health savings for residents in the area as they got access to these places to have recreation opportunities and cleaner air and all of the things that come along with introducing more green space into an environment. And it actually broke down to $300 per person per year saved in health expenses. And then the new green spaces here absorb 300 to 700 pounds of carbon annually. So from a climate change perspective, waterfront investment makes a lot of sense as well. And then Milwaukee, Wisconsin is another example where they had a freeway running along their riverfront. This freeway had double the traffic that we have here in Duluth. It was a 54,000 daily trip urban freeway with smaller streets, or they replaced the freeway with smaller streets and kind of reintroduced the grid. It increased access to the Milwaukee riverfront for people in the neighborhood and saved money on infrastructure maintenance. Building the parkway and associated streets cost only 1/4 of what it would have cost to rebuild the interstate itself. And this too led to a $2 billion economic impact. And so key takeaways of investing in waterfront areas. People want to be near water. Events that happen near water are always well attended. And because of those psychological reasons, people have a natural draw for being around, areas with waves and with water. And they're just really important places to invest in. People are willing to pay to be near water. So you can see, when you create really nice waterfront areas and places where people can get near water, investment happens in these areas because, people are willing to spend money on these things. People are happier and healthier near water. This is a picture in Duluth. You can see, a bunch of kids jumping off of the Uncle Harvey's mausoleum, which is a really fun thing. If you ever do that, and I would highly recommend it. And people will find ways to get to water even in adverse situations. So this is an image from the Duluth Harbor Camp from September. As you can see, we have we're in the middle of a pandemic, but there are still lots of people who are coming to visit this area because the draw of the waterfront is that significant. And so our waterfront has a pretty extensive history of industrial use. And so this is a map from 1887. This is, very early into the city's history, but already we can see a number of, significant industrial developments. The city's hillside has been pretty well carved out. One other thing you notice is that our downtown area has already been separated from our waterfront by a very large rail yard facility. And so, if you look at the waterfront areas, you can see you've got all these smokestacks, which is what they always used to include in these sort of maps, because smokestacks were a sign of a prospering city. So there are a lot of those. People didn't really think of the waterfront as something that you wanted to be around. And so for most of our city's history, these rail yards continued to exist and serve as this major disconnection. And even as the Canal Park area began to kind of change away from this industrial use, we saw rail yards still, being the determining factor in keeping people out of those areas from our downtown and residential spots. But eventually, people were able to convince the rail yards to move out of downtown. And, I've heard from people who have had to deal with railroads on, other projects that They are incredibly difficult to deal with, and it's nearly impossible to get them to move their facilities. Somehow in Duluth, we were able to do that. And so all of these rail yards ended up getting relocated to Superior. And, you'd think, oh, that's great. So what did we do? Well, we ended up putting an interstate there instead. And so this kind of created a new opportunity for people to get to Duluth. The original proposal for Interstate 35 had the freeway running out on the water body. It kind of followed along where the lake walk was today. And so this would have completely eliminated access to the waterfront for most of the people of our city. And then it would have ran like this all the way to 10th Avenue East. And naturally, this created a lot of uproar from people who recognized that, this was going to be really awful for our city. So many of the people who recognized the potential were kind of gathered in this group called Citizens for Integration of Highway and Environment, if I recall correctly. And so that was kind of spearheaded by Kent Worley, who was a landscape architect, who led this campaign to try to find another way to make this freeway happen without completely eliminating our access to the waterfront. Another main figure in this project was Don Olson, who was the MnDOT project lead, who pushed for evaluating more than just traffic in I-35's downtown corridor. And he, along with some other people involved in this, ended up creating a multiple use study, which basically was one of the first examples of looking at a freeway's impact on anything other than just traffic. And so Duluth was really forward thinking, and MnDOT really has a lot of credit to take for being willing to look at these things in a more all-encompassing way. And they had a lot of foresight on their part, because in the early 1970s, when a lot of this work was happening, Canal Park was not worth protecting, and the lakefront was really an ugly place. And so these people, the two guys in the previous image and just tons of other people in the community who were pushing for a better solution and preserved access were visionaries, because they knew what was going to happen if we actually created proper access to our waterfront. And so the final plan basically created this system of freeway decks in which, you had a bunch of different opportunities for accessing the waterfront and linking the areas on either side of the interstate through a bunch of tunnels and overpasses and other exciting improvisations. Two important pieces, however, did not end up being built of this original plan. In the western part of downtown, there was going to be Harbor Square, which was actually where Duluth was originally going to build their mall. This would have connected downtown to the Entertainment and Convention Center and would have been built on top of the freeway. Obviously, the mall ended up going up on Miller Hill and did not get built here. And so we don't really have a strong pedestrian connection here other than the Northwest Passage Skywalk, which is, useful, but not the best, it's not really something that draws people to want to cross. And also the Superior Street connections to Lake Place, which is now renamed Gichiodea King. The park was originally supposed to run all the way to Superior Street so that there was a direct visual and physical connection between the lake and our downtown, but those two areas didn't end up getting built. And so here's kind of what the area that was supposed to be Harbor Square looks like today. There's, again, just the skywalk here. And then this is one of the areas where even today we still have a very large space available to make this connection happen. But unfortunately, it just hasn't been built. And part of the reasoning for that was because the original I-35 project was only going to fund the part of the park that was above the interstate. But what ended up happening here was the city essentially took the money to build these connections and used it to put in the brick streets that you see at the bottom of the screen here. And this spot has been vacant ever since. nobody has taken on the project to finally build the connection, and we've had kind of our weird boardwalk system that takes people off of Superior Street in place as a alternative that works but isn't ideal. And so because those two main pieces of the plan didn't get built, there are still a number of notable connection issues between the waterfront and downtown. So one of the main outcomes of this story is the rebranding of Canal Park. What we see today is that, you know, the Canal Park waterfront has become much different than it was during the original years of this project. It is now a tourism hub and one of the most visited places in Minnesota. And the waterfront here was a direct result of the freeway project, because the beach that we have, or at least had, now it's looking a little different, but a lot of that rock came from the tunneling that was done through our downtown. And so this created a new accessible waterfront on which the lake walk was built. And it really kind of opened the door for the new development that we saw, mostly the hotels, which created a place for people to stay, which then created demand for new businesses serving those people. And so we've seen this huge turnaround in Canal Park, and it's really kind of flipped from what it was when the freeway was being planned. And so the impact of Interstate 35 isn't all positive. Throughout its period of construction, it ended up demolishing a lot of our city and creating a lot of disconnect as it went through. You can see here, you know, in the west part of town, it did a lot more damage to homes and neighborhoods. And even in the east part of town, it didn't demolish as much stuff, and it was done much more thoughtfully. But even still, the tunnels that were built, everything that was on top of them still had to be removed. And there was a lot of space along the rail yards downtown that was taken out as well. And so it hasn't all been, you know, warm and fuzzy as far as building the freeways through Duluth goes. And so you can see just doing an estimate overlaying aerial imagery from pre-interstate times and looking at the area where the interstate was built, we were able to find 529 homes that were demolished, 109 businesses. And then, you know, using average household sizes from those times, we were able to conclude that 1,713 people were removed. And if you actually map out the original route through town, which was via Highway 61, it's still there today, so you can still drive that way. And if you compare it to using that versus taking the interstate across town, it's only 13 minutes faster to take the interstate. And so, you know, was it worth it? I don't know. I mean, it's brought some positives, of course, but it's also had its costs. And so, you know, you just kind of have to take an honest look at it and come to your own conclusion. And so one thing that happened during the planning of the interstate was it was built anticipating Duluth would grow significantly. And so during the planning processes during the 1950s and 60s, we really thought Duluth was going to continue on this upward trend. But what actually happened is the city declined in population by a considerable amount over the coming decades. And so today we have infrastructure built for a city of nearly 120,000 people, but the city itself has shrunk down to around, 80 to 90,000. I can't remember exactly where we're at today. But we have less people who are utilizing all of this infrastructure, and it's very expensive to maintain, as we've seen with the Can of Worms project and other things that have been undergoing recently. And it's an interesting trend because, you know, a lot of other cities that are similar in size to Duluth haven't seen this decline that we've seen. So it's like, what's going on in Duluth that is causing this? And so, you know, one way to kind of rethink this is looking at our infrastructure and maybe right-sizing it. And so today we still have this strong physical and psychological disconnect in our downtown in spite of planning efforts to not make that happen. And so we're trying to kind of reevaluate what some of that looks like. And so what we say when we meet, or what we mean when we say physical and psychological disconnect, is there are a lot of places that are really close to the waterfront, but you wouldn't guess it. For example, the Lincoln Park Business District is only 700 feet from the St. Louis Harbor. The Duluth Transit Center is only 550 feet from the slip that houses the William A. Irvin. And even the Zeitgeist building, who is hosting our event today and sponsored it, they're 225 feet from the lake. And, you know, that's really not far, but it doesn't feel like this part of our downtown is waterfront property because there's an interstate in the way that causes you to have this psychological disconnect. And so, for example, taking these distances and comparing them to some places that people do think of as waterfront areas, the DeWitt Sites building is 375 feet from the harbor and 630 feet from the lake. And even Grandma's is 500 feet from the lake and 300 feet from the canal. So a lot of parts of our downtown are actually closer to the waterfront than a lot of these quote unquote waterfront places. And so most of that is due in part to the interstate and the fact that it creates this disconnect. And so when we look at the broader context of these areas, we can see that, you know, the Central Hillside, which is above downtown, is one of the residential neighborhoods, and it has an incredibly high diversity and low income population. Many here are dependent on walking and biking, and we'll get into those details a little bit more. The Central Business District is our traditional downtown, and it has a general lack of street activity and poor connectivity to the waterfront. The Heart/Medical District is the fastest growing part of downtown, which is shifting from high to low density very quickly. And then we have Canal Park on the other side, which is one of the most visited places in Minnesota. And it has a high amount of pedestrian activity, but it's severely congested with cars because of the bottlenecks caused by the interstate. And so I-35 divides these local and tourist areas and prevents residents from safely accessing the waterfront while also keeping tourists from patronizing downtown businesses. And so looking at the demographics of everybody living in 1 mile of the project, you can see the median household income is significantly lower than Duluth and Minnesota. Out of the 10,821 people here, 2,212 identify as having a disability. 4,198 identify as having income below the poverty level. 32% do not even own a vehicle. 8.9% are reliant on public transit, and 18.5% walk or bike to work every day. And so that's a lot of people in this area that aren't being served at all by these uses that we've kind of devoted this space to. And even for people who are driving, it's not the best layout. You can see this visualizes data that was taken from MnDOT's annual daily or average annual daily trip report, which kind of estimates the number of cars that use a given stretch of road per day. And it compares it against the volumes of those roads. And so I-35 in our downtown actually gets less than 50% of the capacity it was built for. But all of the ramps and infrastructure built to get people between Canal Park and downtown or from one of those neighborhoods onto the interstate is incredibly overwhelmed and overburdened by what's going on in these areas. Especially in Canal Park, where everyone kind of has to bottleneck onto Lake Avenue. The overpass there is at nearly 200% of its capacity. And so our solution is hopefully to find new ways to deal with these sort of problems. And so what the project is all about is removing the interstate and opening up the space and trying to figure out, you know, if we could take this space and reclaim it for our city and find out what the people of the community really want to do with it, what would that look like? And so some of our goals are to spur sustainable economic growth, generate new green spaces, enhance safety and mobility, and create a unified downtown. So this is the existing layout that we're looking at. As you can see, the interstate is a large gray swath through much of this city. You can also see, you know, Duluth in general is very gray. there's just like tons of parking lots everywhere, and there's not a lot of development. We have a few parks here and there, but they're kind of disconnected and few and far between. And so what we're proposing for this area looks more like this. And so it calls for taking the interstate and converting it into a parkway. They've done this in a number of other cities, including some of the ones that we cited as case studies earlier in the presentation. Generally, doing this doesn't have an adverse effect on traffic, but it does open tons of space for other uses. In this case, we're looking at, new developable areas, new green public spaces, and kind of improving our transportation grid. And so kind of going from west to east along the concept, the area just north of Bayfront Park would focus on kind of residential use. This would create space for new development that could be focused towards rail commuter-oriented residential. So anticipating the eventual connection of the Northern Lights Express, that'll open up a lot of demand for people who want to live here but commute to the city. And so creating space for that is huge. Moving across, we have a more high density mixed use area to take advantage of a lot of the traffic that occurs between downtown and the convention center. And then on the far eastern part of downtown, we have more green space noted to kind of process, stormwater and do things like that, while also creating a centralized park between our downtown and Canal Park areas. We also call for a number of new enhancements along the waterfront just to try to really bring people to the water and make it easier for people to transverse between these different areas. One other notable thing is the link, which there will be a rendering of that later in the presentation, but before the interstate, the Lake Avenue overpass kind of ran directly to the lift bridge, and so we want to bring that back but make it a pedestrian focused connection. And so that would be an overhead overpass because that area will likely have very high traffic no matter what we do. And so it gives people a safe way to cross through these areas. And so looking at it in a section view, this is a comparison of what we're proposing versus what exists now. It's crazy to think, but in certain spots of downtown, there are actually 14 lanes of traffic that run parallel to each other. So you have, 2 lanes for your ramps, 2 lanes for westbound traffic on I-35, 2 lanes for eastbound traffic on I-35, the I-35 on-ramp, the other 2 lanes that run from 5th to Lake Avenue. And then you have, Railroad Street, which is also 4 to 5 lanes, depending on where you draw the section. And it really just kind of shows how much space this stuff takes up and how redundant a lot of these uses are. And so what we're calling for is consolidating all of this into one new high volume parkway that can handle all of this traffic, but take up less space and also provide new opportunities for development and public space and green infrastructure and all these other things. And so this is what it would look like from a kind of typological transportation layout. And so you can see we're creating a lot of new vehicle points of access for the waterfront areas as well by extending the downtown street grid across what used to be the I-35 corridor. This hopefully will make it easier for people to get in and out of these areas as well by giving them more places to access the high volume parkway instead of having everyone funnel into the few overpasses that we have right now at 5th and Lake Avenue. But it also creates a number of new crossing opportunities for bikes and pedestrians and creates a number of high interest amenities in the middle of all that so that hopefully we're drawing tourist activity up into downtown and also making it easier and safer for people who live in the hillside, again, a lot of which don't even have cars, to access these waterfront amenities themselves and make sure that they're taking part in the new amenities that are being proposed. So again, removing the interstate opens up 20+ acres of land in downtown to be developed. And this kind of creates the financial incentive. Obviously, land downtown is very hard to come by just because of existing space, as well as, just the geology of our city. It's incredibly difficult to build anywhere in Duluth. And so this gives us a lot of space where we can build new things that doesn't require demolishing families' homes or getting rid of small businesses like we've seen in some other places in town. And we're really running out of space in our city. And so this is a good way to create really prime real estate without, having to displace anything other than lanes of concrete. And then generating public green space is another main goal of this project. Again, public spaces are huge for, the health and well-being of communities. And so using some of the revenues that would be created by these developments to provide a steady source of funding for maintaining and programming these parks is kind of the idea. And so it creates a network of green space throughout our downtown, upon which, we can create all of these exciting public spaces, but also create space for green infrastructure and processing stormwater and floodwaters from Lake Superior storms, and really making sure that, our city has committed itself to being a climate resilient city. And so you need space to do that. And this allows us to create that space while also creating public amenities at the same time. Another really exciting thing about public space is how it brings people from diverse backgrounds together. And so when people are out in public space, they're experiencing the same thing together. And so it allows people to kind of find common ground, which I think is something that we really need to focus on, especially in how divisive our current climate is as a culture. And so, anytime we can invest in public space, I think is a win. And then just looking at this from a financial standpoint, we've got, a huge portion of the project area we're looking at is roadway right now. Over half of this section is, road space, followed by rail, followed by parking, then green space, and then buildings. What we're proposing is to convert a lot more of that space into tax generating areas, while also, again, creating a parkway that takes up a lot less space, but can handle the traffic, and just kind of consolidating parking into more dense structures instead of having so many surface lots, and really just enhancing and expanding the amount of green space downtown. And so these are goals that, we've come up with, but also it's completely in line with what the city has laid out for their Imagine Duluth 2035 plan. So these are a number of policies that come from their transportation section, which include improving street conditions to function better for everyone, reducing infrastructure costs through innovation and wholesale design change, adding to the transportation network by systematically enhancing multimodal options, improving system condition and connections in and between downtown and Canal Park, basing decisions in the context of improving city and neighborhood vitality and not on through traffic, and protecting and enhancing regional transportation networks, especially for the purpose of expanding opportunities for freight movement. And so kind of what we're looking at in order to make these sort of things happen is, this is kind of a loose timeline. And so we've released our initial concept, and we know that it's not the winning solution by any means, but we put it out there to get people excited. And already we've got a lot of feedback from people, and a lot more people have become involved in this project. And, we put this stuff out to hopefully grow community support. And then once we get more community support, we create more ideas. And then that leads to, revisiting our plans and updating the concepts, and then creating new visualizations, which creates more excitement. And it kind of circles like this until, whenever we reach the point when we can actually create enough pressure on these agencies who can create this sort of change. And so eventually, it kind of breaks off into these two timelines where we can leverage the MnDOT I-35 study. MnDOT, again, in the past has been very forward thinking about these sort of things. And so we want to make sure that, we're thinking about this stuff before it happens, and not, coming to a point where it's like, oh, I-35 is being redone, and it's too late to really think about it in a long-term way. We know that this isn't going to happen for a long time, but we want to get out ahead of that to hopefully affect built outcomes. And in the meantime, also connect some of these ideas to investment so that we can accomplish the previously stated goals that we came up with. And so, I mean, right now, our downtown has a lot going for it, but we really think that, you know, making these sort of investments would really promote our downtown in a really exciting way. And right now is a good time for everyone to come together around a shared vision for our future, because it's so hard with all the things that are going on in the world to try to think about tomorrow. But I think, you know, this presents an exciting opportunity for people to, you know, provide their feedback and feel like they have a say in what's going to happen to our city as it moves forward. And so if people are looking to get involved in this, we are an open group of people who have been working on this. We don't turn people away. Anyone who has a say about this, even if you don't like this idea and you think it's awful, we want to hear from you, because a downtown should be representative of the overall community, and not just a few people who have some drawing skills. And so if you're interested in getting involved, reach out. On our website, we have a contact form, and we meet roughly once a month to discuss different topics. And even if you don't want to get involved, just sharing this idea is huge. We need to kind of create public support for it and share it around so that it's interesting to people and people are aware of it. And so that's what we want to do. And hopefully, if we can get enough people on our side to push for something like this to happen, we can see a better Duluth. So that's kind of what I've got for today. At this point, we can open it up to questions, and I'll do my best to answer them.
Hi, I have a question.
Yeah.
So I imagine people who may be opposed to this kind of project would say that the downtown area in Canal Park isn't really the common gathering space for the community, especially as it's kind of developed and spread out over times within different neighborhoods. Do you have a response to that sort of criticism, or what are you thinking on that front?
I mean, I think, you know, people are always looking for places that they feel they have buy-in in. So a lot of times, you know, it's harder to feel like you have a say in how downtown looks, because it seems like it's controlled by these greater forces. And so it's easier to create these sort of places at a more localized level. But I mean, the hope of this project is to really kind of get people involved in having, you know, a sense of ownership over our downtown, and creating exciting outcomes that are representative of what people want to see. And, you know, you're right. It doesn't always feel like downtown is like a place for the broader population, but I think, you know, in theory it should be. And so that's one thing we want to accomplish.
Thanks.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I'll jump in and just say, you know, it's more of a comment than a question you can follow up on. Is I just think it's so important that you and your group have come out ahead of the game to open people's eyes up. I mean, the concepts you have are really cool. You've mixed them up in there to demonstrate what's possible. And hopefully, you know, there could be some other organizations that might think of this and work on it, and how open you are to accepting anybody's thoughts and ideas early on and up front. So kudos to you and all the work your group has put together, because I just really like the idea, and what I see here is not a separation of downtown and Canal Park. It becomes a downtown and not a separation. It feels like it brings it together more.
Right. Yeah.
And that's something that has been a struggle forever, right? I mean, it's so whatever pieces. I'm curious though, if you've heard from other organizations or like groups, if they've been thinking about this, and is there competing groups out there yet? Or competing is probably not a great word, but have you seen any of that besides the agencies?
I mean, I don't know. I think that we've got a lot of different, like people from different backgrounds have reached out to us. I don't think, outside of Facebook commenters who obviously provide dissenting opinions on this, there hasn't been a lot of people who have said, we have a different version of this. So, I mean, I'd say as far as like competing organizations, I don't feel like that's been a thing. No.
Well, I'd even say that because it feels to me like you would just bring them in anyways. I mean,
Oh yeah, for sure.
And that, I mean, the old freeway project and other projects in the city, it's really refreshing to have someone come out in front and garner some conversation, and less of the clash at the end, but more building a common ground moving forward. I came in late. Do you know when MnDOT's really going to be looking at this area? Has that been formalized yet? Or
this area specifically, what I've heard loosely, not from MnDOT, is that, these projects kind of go in 50-year phases. And so this section was built in the late 80s, early 90s. And so depending on how things work out, the actual reconstruction wouldn't happen for quite a while yet. But there is supposed to be an I-35 corridor study, which looks at the entire interstate. I don't know where that's at. I heard that there were funding issues the last time I talked to MnDOT about it. I'm not sure when that will happen, but I imagine, having some say in that process, that'll kind of determine what they're thinking system-wide for this area.
Thanks.
Yeah, no problem. There are a few questions in the chat too that I will try to answer. One is, have you talked to MnDOT, the city of Duluth, and the railroad? There are a lot of different people and companies involved. Yes, absolutely. We've reached out to MnDOT at kind of a preliminary level, just telling them about the project and letting them know that it exists. We tried to, and I think there might be some MnDOT people in this meeting right now. I'm not sure if they ended up joining or not, but they're aware of the project and they've encouraged us to keep pursuing it. They haven't said, we're not going to do this. They also haven't said this is a great idea. They're remaining neutral, which is kind of what they're supposed to do. As far as the city goes, we do have city planning. We've met with them. They will be participating in our monthly meetings moving forward, as will the Metropolitan Interstate Council, which is kind of in charge of deliberating funding for projects in the city. The railroad we haven't reached out to yet, but that is on the agenda because they have a main say in this too.
Okay. I was just wondering, because the railroad, I actually currently work for MnDOT.
Oh, cool.
And not on this project, I'm doing other stuff, but I was just wondering about, because the railroad I feel like is really difficult. And if you're moving the whole entire railroad, just a heads up, that might be something that's like logistically really, really hard to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's definitely something we're aware of. And, this is kind of like an idealized version of this concept. We realize,
Okay.
As we work with organizations, there'll be give and take, and maybe the railroad can't move, and so we'd have to work around that. But
yeah. I really like this though. This is pretty good.
Thank you. That's great to hear. Another question that we have: do you have more details about the highway study coming up? I don't know if that. Oh, wait, okay. Or rather, how to leverage resources moving forward to ensure the idea has a powerful say in future construction. Again, I think the best thing we can do right now is just try to get this idea in the heads of as many people as possible, because, MnDOT is supposed to listen to the public to determine how to best serve their needs. And if we can convince the public that this is a good idea and this is how we want our needs to be served, that's how we do it. I don't know how to, leverage resources, I guess, but I think, that's what we want to do. And so making sure that, the concept is in line with their ideas and it's maintaining transportation needs, but also, looking at a lot of other stuff that downtowns require. We have one question asking, how does this intersect with the Can of Worms project and Highway 53 construction? So at present, we haven't really gone that far, but a lot of the feedback we've been receiving is to actually take this concept and go further west with it, and east as well. I do think that there's a lot of validity in trying to connect with Lincoln Park. That's obviously a huge activity area. So, I mean, I think it'd be great if we can find better ways to kind of tie that in. The original plans for I-35 was for it to end at the Can of Worms and just kind of continue on as Highway 61 from there. And so, you know, maybe we look at what that could look like if we were to bring that idea back. I don't know. It's something that is definitely worth exploring.
Hey Jordan, this is Libby. I agree with Mike. This is really great to see the forward thinking, and your presentation is terrific. Have you given it to, or thinking of giving it to groups like the Chamber and Rotary and all the different sort of groups out there? Just, I think the sooner people see it and the more people just, you know, repetition of seeing things, people just become more comfortable with the concept.
Yeah, we've been in that process, and again, you know, we're all volunteers. No one's paying us to do anything, so it's hard to get everything done. But we have met with the Canal Park Business District or Business Group or whatever that is, as well as the Greater Downtown Council. We've presented to both of them, and yeah, you're right. There are a lot of other groups that we should present to, and we plan to get to them when we can make time for that. But yeah, I mean, that's huge. And the business community in these areas is important to have on our side. Absolutely. I hope they can get behind, you know, this, because it would create a lot more draw for our city. And I think especially on the downtown side, you know, I-35 is confining a lot of activity to one side of our interstate. And so if we can get that into downtown, that would be great. I mean, even moving it up to First Street and Second Street and a lot of those areas where we see a lot of blight issues. I think it's important to do that, but also, you know, of course, make sure that people are not getting priced out of their neighborhoods and things like that is another huge part of the project that we're trying to figure out how to do. But you know, it's complicated, and we know we don't have all the answers, but we're trying to, you know, work with the community to find them. So yeah, that's kind of a long-winded answer, but.
No, thanks. And we need to connect, to make sure that this is connected with the work going on for climate related issues in the city that so directly and ties in with that.
Yes, and yeah, I mean, climate change is of course, you know, one of the biggest issues that we're facing, and a lot of people say Duluth is climate proof, and I don't really buy into that, because you know, we already are seeing worse storms on the lake and the damage that that's caused. People forget about, you know, wildfires are a valid threat in our community, and just like with things getting hotter in the city, that it's damaging to a lot of our native, you know, plant and wildlife populations. And so we want, you know, eventually it would be great to do kind of a climate change plan just for this project, because there are so many opportunities to kind of overlay that stuff on top of this. But for now, we're just saving space for it. And yeah. Another question, do you have any examples of places where development was designed to prevent gentrification, pricing people out of their homes? Of course, this is a really hard issue. The one thing that I keep finding is, you know, people need to have ownership of these investments, and the people in the neighborhoods need to actually be benefiting from the increases in activity that are going on, and not just, you know, be witness to it and then eventually be priced out of it. Honestly, I don't know if I have any good examples to provide. I know that every city kind of tries to deal with it differently by, you know, like kind of mandating affordable housing and things like that. but it's something that's on our radar, and we've been trying to work with the city on, setting up panels of local residents who live in the neighborhood to figure out what they think about all this, and if they're comfortable with it, and how they can be more involved and potentially be on the winning side of this. It's definitely something that we want to do. I mean, we don't want to kick people out of the neighborhood. We want to make it better for them. So we just don't know exactly how yet.
I have a question and a comment. I would think that as far as timing goes, it's certainly your point that we need to have essentially a pretty firm vision going into what MDOT and on IH-35 for this section of IH-35. But the real problem right now, the immediate problem, which your data indicates, is just the flow of traffic in north-south. And that the two major crossings, I think you mentioned it was something like 200% exceeding what the capability, and Lake Avenue would help that, but that's only one of the two, and we need more crossings, just for pedestrians and bikes, but also for vehicles. And it really creates a traffic nightmare at certain times of the year when the Canal Park area or even the downtown area is really being used. So I thought it was very insightful that this is connected to the upper level requirements within the city's plan. And as far as the timing goes, are there some city projects which could, sort of be done or recast, or even, just viewed differently with this attitude and this approach to design that for this area that you have?
Yeah.
And then the second thing is, just very quickly, this same approach and attitude, the combination of assumptions, criteria, and design, and then feedback, from the community, would apply to just about anywhere. Western Duluth, even up Central Avenue, and then further east, in the communities and neighborhoods that are trying to deal with increased traffic of pedestrians, bikes, and cars, and all of that integrated together. So, do you see it really, this attitude, is it importable elsewhere? Just like one of the other people said, there's problems elsewhere in Duluth as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that's big. I think that this is a process that's easily replicated. And, our group name is the Duluth Waterfront Collective. We didn't pick the Downtown Waterfront Collective because eventually, maybe we will expand to some of those areas. This is obviously a huge undertaking in and of itself, but you're right. There are equally important issues going on in just about every neighborhood in Duluth as far as, the built environment and making sure people can access the amenities that are built for them. Going back to what you were saying about, what kind of projects are ongoing right now that, maybe the city can kind of rethink. Of course, I mean, this is looking, 20 years in the future. So there's the interstate piece of it, but then there's also, the process of the adjacent areas, which, need to be protected and preserved. And so, like, for example, if you look at this map right here, or maybe it'll look better if we do it this way, you can see, like, right here, there's this parking ramp that would have to go away in order to make a street get through there. And I know that I think the DTA is looking at developing there. And so if they decide to put a building right in this spot, that kind of kiboshes this whole connection. And so, there are things that we can do right now to kind of make the way for this plan if it were to be adopted by the city in some formal sense, to kind of keep these right-of-ways open and preserve the room for these sort of things to happen. Yeah, I mean, it's just that's kind of where we're at with it. Does that answer your question? I mean, that's like a very specific example, but of course, any project going on in these areas, if you look at it from, how could it play into this, there's opportunity to work in that direction.
That's right. And I think also for the Interstate 35 review later that you said you're just in sort of the entry level, hey, this is coming at end of life, in another 10, to 20 years.
Mhm.
So it helps the city get its act together, and the communities and the neighborhoods get their act together in
Right.
terms of facilitating the sort of connections that would have to take place, working with MDOT, on that particular piece.
Yeah.
So I think that where a project could be done to facilitate moving in this direction, or moving in, a more formal direction based on the city vision, that you've already shown the connection.
Hmm.
I think that would be great.
Thank you. Yeah. A few other questions from the chat. What sort of activities can community members be involved in the near future? I mean, like I said, we have on our website, there's a contact form. And if you fill that out expressing that you want to get involved, we can tie you in. We meet like once a month, roughly. Our next meeting will be the 9th of November at noon for 1 hour. And we will be, hopefully, we kind of just like let members bring up topics that they want to discuss and provide feedback. And like I said, this plan is fluid. And so if you have an idea that you don't see in this plan that we've got and you want to see it, bring it up. We'll discuss it. And if it's kind of, if it's thought to be a good idea, it gets in the plan, and we want to listen to the community work through this sort of stuff. As far as, not being directly involved in group activities, I mean, it's really hard right now. It would be great to all gather around a table and like take a pen to this and start drawing stuff out, but we can't really do that. And so it's just like trying to find good ways to engage the public. So right now, what we're trying to do most is just spread the idea. Write to your city councilor if you think this is a good idea. Of course, politicians, they have the power to make these sort of things happen to some degree. Just use the powers that are available to you as a person. And, don't be annoying about it. Like, don't bother people like, oh, the interstate sucks. Don't focus on that. I really want this to be kind of a positive discussion, and really focus it on, this is what we could have. All of these things are capable without, demolishing family homes and whatever else we could talk about. Because it's really a great opportunity for the city, and I hope that it stays in a positive light as we move forward with it. Another question is, has your group thought about snow removal for these areas at all? No, but of course, that's getting really far into it. What we have laid out, there's tons of green space available, and these areas could be used, we're in a northern climate city, so it's smart for us to think about these areas and to create plantings that, are salt tolerant and can actually process those waters as they melt in the spring. And so we can kind of create ways to naturally deal with snow as it's removed from the streets and pushed into these designated areas that can treat them before they run off into the lake. I mean, snow removal is snow removal no matter what, whether we keep the interstate or not. You have to remove snow from it. I don't know if that's answering the question correctly or if there was kind of another idea intended there. So if you want to follow up on that, let me know. Anyone else have anything? Oh, okay. I would think less concrete would mean easier snow removal. That's true. Yes. Yeah. So if anyone else has anything, we're at 1 o'clock now. I'll stay on as long as people want. Please keep asking questions if you have them.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
Has your plan considered the impact on property taxes, or is it thought that increased high density, having high density development there would increase the tax base, or have you considered those sorts of things yet?
Yes. I mean, we haven't done any sort of analysis on what those numbers would look like, but that's part of the whole idea is that, this investment would pay for itself because of the developable space that's included in the concept. through tax revenues. And so, you know, it's undeniably not going to be a cheap thing to do. I don't know if it'll cost more or less than rebuilding the interstate. You know, we've seen with the can of worms that rebuilding what we have is incredibly expensive in and of itself. And in some of the case studies we've looked at, replacing the interstate with a parkway has actually cost like usually like a quarter of the cost of what a freeway would cost. But I mean, we're also including a lot of other stuff. And, you know, this land served as a rail yard for a very, very long period. There's going to be soil remediation that needs to be done. That's going to be expensive. That's one of the things that drove the can of worms cost up so high. But this development has the potential to create the revenue that pays for all of that and then some. And so that's kind of why one of the main driving forces from a financial standpoint for doing this. I mean, it's very valuable land and it's close to where everyone wants to be, and it shouldn't be used for just an interstate. I mean, that's kind of one of the overarching ideas, I guess. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Okay. Speak now or forever hold your peace.
I just have, I guess, one quick question. Can you post do you have like a web page, like a link that you could post in the chat?
Yeah, absolutely. I will type it in right now. We also have, we're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. So you can follow us there as well. We try to keep stuff available on those channels. But our website is, I'll put it here in the chat. I don't need to say it. That's it, highway61duluth.com. And we did actually just put on our website a new sort of page that talks more about the history of I-35 and the damage that it caused, and kind of trying to estimate some of those impacts. But our main homepage deals with this concept and tries to make the case for it. So yeah, I mean, people here, if you want to share that, that'd be great. If you like this idea, you know, like I said, that's huge. And we appreciate that a lot. And then, yeah, at the bottom of the web page I just sent in the chat, that's where the contact form is to get involved. Also, you know, you can just chat me here and I can add you to the list as well if you provide an email. But if you don't want to do that publicly, that might be the best way to do it. Anything else? All right, well, everyone have a nice Halloween.
Thanks, Jordan.
Keep it spooky. Make sure you vote and drop off your ballot in person. I don't know how many of you are aware of that, but there's some new sort of funky business going on with that. So make sure you get your ballot in and vote. It's important. Have a nice weekend. It's a great day. So thank you all for attending.
Thank you.
Thank you.